There's the scene that I feel marks the White Wizard Saruman's irreversible fall from grace once he sets off to transform Isengard into this military complex or a military factory which drives his machine of war. And his first immediate act after pledging allegiance to the Dark Lord Sauron is to command that the trees which surround Orthanc be all plucked from the ground to fill the furnaces. And it is very disheartening to witness this once beautiful garden be slowly turned into a desolate land. And we also all remember that during this destruction, a gloomy rain begins to drop as if nature itself is weeping. Then there is also the river that runs through Isengard, which the orcs dam and use its mechanical energy to make the machines go round. All of that to say that the White Wizard will indiscriminately utilize nature to do evil with no regard or respect whatsoever. Hello everyone, welcome back to the channel. This is Rob Samora with a new episode of I Got a Channel, on which we're going to, again, delve a little deeper into the themes found in Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy of films. In particular, we're going to explore the character of the damned White Wizard Saruman in his relationship with the world and in his role in the story as a great or the great subjugator of nature. For Saruman is such a force to be reckoned with in his relentless pursuit not only to dominate all things in the material, physical realm, but in the spiritual realm as well. But before we begin, I would like to highlight once more that I'll focus on Jackson's trilogy of films only and will not cross-reference it with the much more expensive lore of the Lord of the Rings series of books. There will come a time to have these wonderful book discussions, but that is not today. So without further ado, let's talk entertainment. It is beyond question that, in the story of the Lord of the Rings, Sauron is the great threat to the free peoples. He is the Dark Lord, the ultimate evil, who is out to plunge Middle-earth into a second darkness, with Saruman, according to Galadriel's words in the Two Towers, serving more as a puppet in the Dark Lord's schemes. That, however, does not diminish Saruman's presence as this formidable foe, first to the Fellowship of the Ring, and later to the Kingdom of Rohan. Whilst Sauron, who at this point in the story lacks a physical form, never fails to make his oppressive presence felt throughout, Saruman seems to be more of a hands-on agent and carries out a significant portion of the dirty work. From the very moment Saruman reveals himself to Gandalf the Grey as a traitor, he simply has no more reason to conceal his malevolence. And there is this scene that I just love, in which Saruman has the great eye of Sauron in the Palantir and is commanded by the Dark Lord to build an army worthy of Mordor, to then later find himself all alone in a room which appears to be a library. He is all crooked, he is meditating, until a couple of orcs enter and Saruman orders them to initiate work. I feel like that scene marks the White Wizard's irreversible fall from grace, as he ultimately pledges his allegiance to the Dark Lord, setting off to transform Isengard into a military complex or a military factory which will drive his machine of war. And his first immediate act is to command that the trees which surround the Tower of Orthanc be all plucked from the ground to fill the furnaces. One of the orcs even brings up that the trees are strong and their roots go deep. They are probably centuries old. It is simply very disheartening to witness this beautiful garden be slowly turned into a desolate land. We all remember how a gloomy rain begins to drop as the trees are being felled, as if nature itself weeps. And then there's the river, the stream that flows through Isengard. The orcs erect a barrier to dam the river to use the mechanical energy provided by the waters to make the machines go round. All of that to say, again, that the White Wizard will indiscriminately utilize nature to do evil with no regard or respect. Now, I believe that Saruman's desire for domination over nature, in actuality, might stem from something even deeper than hunger for power alone. Being this mystical creature sent by gods as the leader of wizards and to aid the free peoples of Middle-earth, who then chooses to rebel, in essence reveals a hatred for all which is sacred. This drive to subjugate all things being but a protest against the heavens. It is not depicted in the films, but based upon the development of his character and given enough time, I believe Saruman would probably betray Sauron as well, attempt to overthrow him, seize power for himself. The traitor of the gods. What a curse of a title to be known for. Another aspect of his subjugation over nature is the fact that birds and beasts are at work in their favor. Birds which survey and spy on the land in an attempt to capture the whereabouts of the Fellowship, such as the flock of crabine, which locate our heroes just as they are about to take the passage south, in turn forcing them to take the pass of the mountain Carathras. Now, Carathras in itself is already a monument of a challenge, and then there comes Saruman. Being warned by the Fellowship's intent by the birds, the White Wizard puts black magic to use and conjures a supernatural blizzard which causes an avalanche by the means of a lightning strike. This in turn makes the pass over the mountain impossible to overcome. Saruman would even dare make use of the elements to obtain whatever he wants. Think of it for a moment. Control over the very weather to obtain whatever one desires? That is sick. Now, when it comes to the more technological side of things, Saruman also becomes the master of gunpowder, having his Uruk-hai army utilize it to bring down the insurmountable walls of Helm's Deep. It is not made explicit in the films, but from what we gather, it seems like Saruman was the very inventor of gunpowder, for we do not see or know of any utilization of it prior or post to the Battle of Helm's Deep, which again is insane to think about. And we can only imagine the horror to strike the hearts of the warriors fighting the Helm's Deep once they saw these mighty walls which have probably stood for centuries, walls that saved Theoden and his ancestors during other times of war, be simply undone by fire. How can one not have their spirit broken by this? Still, on the technological side, we can see how the White Wizard uses his black magic yet again to meddle with breeding or genetics, if you will. Only as another reminder, not comparing with the books here, but in the films we get the sense that Saruman was the one to find the means to breed Uruk-hai from orcs, and to be honest, I like that too. I like that in this adaptation, it seems to put even more emphasis that Saruman's devices seem to know no boundary, twisting and misshaping living beings to achieve his ends. The White Wizard even go as far as to utter the preposterous phrase that he has perfected the orcs. And we know for a fact that the Uruk-hai are taller, stronger, faster, much more fierce warriors than the orcs could be. Their armor is thick and their shields broad, to quote Gimli. Saruman himself explains in the Fellowship of the Ring that orcs themselves were once elves taken by the dark powers, tortured and mutilated, a ruined and terrible form of life. So we can pretty much take the orcs as a mockery of the elves. And now the White Wizard has brought forth a mockery of a mockery. And that again is another testament to his vanity and insanity. If you folks have enjoyed this episode so far, I would like to ask you to subscribe. Share the video if you like the message, if the content resonates with you, and it greatly helps the channel as well. And I truly appreciate your support. Now, delving more into the spiritual realm itself, Saruman manages to possess Theoden King, in an attempt to usurp power literally from within. He even succeeds for a time, with Theoden stating that during Saruman's puppeteering of his will, dark were his dreams of late. All the while, in the physical realm, Grima Wormtongue works to have the king's elite riders banished, the Rohirrim. And we can never forsake the tragic death of the king's only son, Theodred, at the hands of the orcs come out of Isengard. So we see Saruman fall into this horrific spiral of going from exerting control over the trees and the rivers and the birds and beasts to exerting control over the weather, to creating new mass destruction weapons of war that can undo stone in the blink of an eye, to experimenting with breeding, to finally attempting to dominate even people's very spirits. And just as I mentioned earlier, Saruman's devices seem to know no boundary. That is until nature itself revolts. Led by Treebeard, the Ents of Fangorn Forest, which are among the most wronged by Saruman, gather up and rise against his evil. And it is of extreme impact that after discovering the destruction brought upon the forest, Treebeard, in total dismay, makes the statement that no word in the language of the Ents, or in the language of men, or in the language of the elves can describe such treachery from the White Wizard. All the while, at Helm's Deep, the battle rages on, with the Uruk-hai forcing their way through to the keep and the last line of defense between a handful of men and the women and children of Rohan, as to annihilate their people once and for all. Amongst this handful are Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli, who still stand beside Theoden in that remarkable scene in the Two Towers in which Aragorn invites the king to ride out and meet the enemy. Fight till the world's end. And so does the king. Gimli blows the horn of Helm Hammerhand, making a striking sound as the king and his men, now mounted, storm through the hordes of bloodthirsty Uruk-hai all the way down past the gates of the fortress and into the battlefield. And then Gandalf announces his arrival with reinforcements. The Rohirrim have come. Now, as the Rohirrim make their descent from atop the hill, charging into battle, we can all see that it resembles the wild waters of a river rapidly descending a steep course. And that is exactly what we can also see in Isengard, once, upon their assault, the Ents break up the dam and release the river, and he rushes down the rocks with such ferocity as to destroy everything on its righteous path. And so this military factory that Saruman had put such wicked effort into building as to unleash destruction was then swept away in a matter of a few seconds. It was long enough that he'd had free rein to do as he pleases, and that his terror had at last come to an end. And that is the power of nature. I believe we can also stretch a parallel here that the same nature which previously wept over the deforestation of Isengard now rejoices with the symbolism of the rising sun that blesses the coming of the Rohirrim. And as a final thought before we close off this episode, I would like to mention that in the theatrical cut of The Return of the King, Saruman simply does not appear. Gandalf, Aragorn, Legolas, and Gimli arrive at Isengard, accompanied by Theoden King and the Rohirrim, where they reunite with the two hobbits Merry and Pippin under the service of Treebeard. Isengard is overrun with water, again, calling back to the point that I made earlier about the river flood sweeping out the dirt that Saruman had made of the site. Then Treebeard explains that the waters of the river are slowly but surely cleansing the land, making things pure and beautiful once more. In the film, Gimli suggests they cut off Saruman's head and get done with him, minus one evil person in the world, right Gimli? But Gandalf shows mercy on Saruman, stating that the former White Wizard has power no more, and that he should be kept in the Tower of Vorthunk. And that is it. Right then and there is the last we hear of Saruman. He most likely remained locked up and away as a prisoner for eternity. And one thing I certainly came to greatly appreciate about the scene in question is this one act of Gandalf offering out mercy on Saruman, despite him being this perpetrator of foul deeds, which, in itself, is a statement to Gandalf's wisdom and humility in contrast to Saruman's own folly and pride. And it also reinforces the fact that Gandalf has no authority to judge such a heavenly creature. I also find it extremely interesting that in spite of all the strife that Saruman brought about through his rebellion, his hatred of that which is sacred, his desire to subjugate nature, the falling White Wizard is taken out in the most mundane, non-spectacular possible manner, which again, is totally counter to the glory he'd been seeking. He had been desperately attempting to become this powerful ruler of peoples and of kingdoms, and following his utter defeat, he was simply locked away behind bars, such as a criminal. I find it genius. And we all remember that in the extended cut of Return of the King, there is an entirely different conflict that happens from atop Orthanc, in which Grima Wormtongue stabs Saruman on the back until Legolas shot him with an arrow, all the while Saruman fell right through a giant spike just to be impaled. Just me describing it sounds like such a convoluted, over-the-top death, and I don't like that in the slightest. I much prefer the simpler, more subtle ending of the theatrical cut. To top it off, I still believe in my heart of hearts that Saruman was not corrupted beyond forgiveness, hence Gandalf's offering of mercy at the end, and that being this angelic creature, he was still somewhat capable of doing good in agreement to his very essence, but simply chose not to repent, and that is indeed a terrible tragedy. Well, that will do it for this episode, folks. I hope you enjoyed it. I certainly had a lot of fun with it. Saruman, I would say, is my second favorite character in The Lord of the Rings, second only to the character of Boromir, whose appearance was brief but surely very compelling, and who I am also planning to do an entire episode on. I have other ideas for similar videos planned out, and again, with The Lord of the Rings being a masterpiece, it is no surprise that there is a myriad of themes which are definitely worth exploring. and I would also like to know your opinion on it. Please leave a comment to stir up interesting conversations. You all have a wonderful day.